Yes, my name is John Fabiano. I served in the United States Navy. I enlisted, but during that time, this was back in 1965, they had a draft going on. And at that time, you could call the draft and see where you were in the list. And I was scheduled to go in October, so I enlisted in August. I served in basically three places. I was in the Navy, and more specifically the NSG, the Naval Security Group. So my first station was in Pensacola, Florida, where I went to school there for communications. Then from there, long story, but I went to Midway Island in the middle of the Pacific, which was an isolated tour of duty for 11 and a half months. And then I went to the best place, Japan, for 2 years, which I thoroughly enjoyed. The early time of training, obviously, is the boot camp that we have to go through, and that was in Chicago and Great Lakes in the winter time. It was very cold there, but that was for 8 weeks. And then I joined because I wanted to get into a schooling and get some more schooling. And at that time, I was studying accounting. So I was told I could go to accounting school. But when I got in, they said there was no accounting school. So I had to pick another choice, and it was communications. And they said they could give me communication school in Pensacola, Florida. So that's what I joined up for. Interesting enough, they had the buddy system then. I had some school friends that were also going in, so we thought we'll go into the United States Navy and get into the buddy system. We'll all go together. And so there was 3 other men that I went in with, and we all went to the Great Lakes. We started there. They ended up first getting out because I was out for a medical condition for a week, and so I had to stay behind, and they went on. But I met one of them down in Pensacola, Florida later on. Yeah, when I got out of Pensacola, Florida, or after Midway Island, I should say, I had choices to go to. And I wanted to travel and see something. And so the first choice I put in was for London, England. I figured, well, if I couldn't go out of the United States, I'd go to, there was only certain areas I could go to, certain ports that I could go to. So my second choice was Washington, D.C., and if I couldn't stay in the States, then I was going to go to the Pacific, and I selected Japan, and that's what I got. So being in Japan was unbelievable. It was really a great country to see, a big country to see, and so I did take time off, and with friends we did travel Japan, so it was good to see it. I heard you talking earlier about the Vietnam era, and that's the era that I was in, and while I was in Japan, I figured, believe it or not, 4 years in the Navy, or 45 months to be exact, I never was on a ship. So, because it was all land duty for communications at the time. So several times I put in for various tours of duty, and it was great for 30 days or 60 days you could put in for tour of duty, and I did put in a couple of times for Saigon. I was well protected there, and I could do my job that I had to do there. But each time that I put in, they rejected it for operational necessity, and I had to stay and do my job there in Japan. Well, it was a communication center there, and we communicated all over the all over the world to various other locations and passing messages back and forth, and that was the main duty. I mean, you either in technical equipment you operated, or you were in a message center. And you did various things while you were there, and various levels of responsibility depending on your rank that you were in. You're only in a certain place for a certain time. So I think the more friendship I built was when I was in 2 years in Japan, and one gentleman was from Massachusetts, and so we stayed in touch for a while, even with some others. But with social media, we sort of try to keep in touch that way. Well, it was mostly, obviously, letter writing at that time, but that got to be tiring to write multi-page letters, so I got a brain idea that I would buy a recording device, old tapes at the time, and I bought one for my parents and one I kept, and we recorded messages, so you could actually hear voices from very family members, and it was easier to ship that back and forth. Well, mainly it was the traveling, because we had Tokyo was in our vicinity. We were only a half hour out of Tokyo, so we would go into Tokyo and sightsee, basically. But I did take the bullet train and went to the southern portion of Japan, saw Hiroshima, an excellent place to see, a remarkable place to see, and the countryside in Japan is a thing to see. No, I got out in 1969. The war continued, and again, it wasn't the most popular one. None of them really are, but at that time, it wasn't very popular, so it was just get back into the mainstream of civilian life. I signed up for 4 years, but at that time, you could get out 3 months early if you went back to college. And I was going to Bentley at the time before, and so I applied to get back in and got a 3-month early out to go back to school, so that's what I did after that. It was a little bit difficult because I was a lot older than the students, obviously, coming out of high school, and here I was already had 4 years over them, but it worked out well. I also worked at the same time I was going to school, so I was going back and forth from work to school. I think it was a lot of curiosity. Being away for 2 years, never got home, so I was curious to see what was happening. But more so is prior to going into the service, while I was at boot camp, since I was applying for the Navy, the NSG security group, they had to do background checks. So there was people talking in the neighborhood. They would come in and interview people in the neighborhood. So they were all curious of what I was doing. So when I got home, they were all very curious. So it was very well welcomed back when I got home. I haven't. It's interesting because all the different lives you build your own family, and so far, no, I haven't met up with anybody, but we do very occasionally talk through social media. Well, that was another interesting thing. I mentioned that I wanted to get into accounting, but got into communications. Since then, I worked for a company and went back into their accounting department, but they had a layoff and they gave me a job back into their communication center. So I figured I was destined for that, so I stayed in that, and that became my career basically in telecommunications, the major companies in the area. I think a lot of the patriotism. At that time, I don't know, people might say there wasn't enough patriotism at that time, but seeing the people that went in, I think they were very patriotic once they were there. And I think of it now. I think of a hope that our country gets back to the patriotic ways that we really need to be successful. And I do like when we see a veteran coming home from the war zone, that we congratulate them and thank them for their service. Yeah, I think when I first went in, it's very hard when you get in boot camp. They're very disciplined, and you think about it, and you really dislike it because you're being told what to do. But I think it gives you some structure in life, and I think it's a good thing. It keeps you focused and keeps you on track. Again, I think we go back to what war we're talking about, and again, the Vietnam War was not well liked, so it was kind of difficult, but I think it's an evil necessary that we have today, and something that we need to watch, I guess. I think of all of the men and women that are in the service today, that I think we have to look at them in a different light, and to really be appreciative of what they're doing. They've left their families, they're putting their lives in danger, and so I think we need to look at them in a different light and really more thankful and appreciative of what they're doing.